Well, we don't have to pursue that. I'm fascinated by what you've been doing.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you a little story then.
Please.
While I was doing my architecture degree at Auckland University, I spent all of my or a lot of money and time on live-in psychological workshops. So you'd live in there for a weekend or a week, etc. So I ended up with all these psychological models. So I was became like a free thinker in psychological models. And I was a fast integrator, so I could get the idea and then act as if almost immediately. So then when I went to Russia, I noticed that the citizens were deconstructed. That is, they were thinking like the state, not like an individual. So, and that was December '89, a month after the Berlin Wall came down. So I got the KGB agents following me and shouted them to lunch, got them a bit drunk, and we traded a few secrets. Then I went back to Budapest, where I didn't speak the language, which was an advantage. And I lived there for another 10 months. And I wrote up about 30 levels of interaction, from actions to what the person was doing, and how you could stimulate and reflect those actions. And then I developed about 5 different layers of dynamics between them. And then January 2002, I leaked it out on radio that I'd done that. And then in July 2002, the president of the Scientists Club in St. Petersburg flew out to New Zealand and asked to meet with me and stay with me for a month, and briefed me on gravity and anti-gravity. And he said, the way you work out gravity is you work out how to fly the planet. So we workshop how to fly the planet and wrote a book on that. And that got stolen by the SAS and the Mossad in 11th May 2005. And while we're doing the briefing, he said, you seem to understand a few things, so do you want a reconstruction in the subconscious, So what he'd done is he got the Russian equipment for deconstructing the subconscious, converted it to reconstructing the subconscious, brought it out to New Zealand, stayed with me, and I had my subconscious reconstructed into 2 positions of my choosing in 10 hours, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
And then
the next day, I met an aide to the Prime Minister and the mafia boss, having coffee together. So we sort of sat down, had mates, and traded stories for 7 years.
Tell me what transition, what change occurred during this interval of time of reconstruction?
When you alter someone's subconscious, they don't know that it has been altered, because they're already acting as if. They don't know that anything has changed, but everything has changed. And the thing about changing the subconscious is that your subconscious draws everything around you according to that training. So all of a sudden you're meeting the people that you need to meet to achieve what you need to achieve. So it's very, very subtle and incredibly effective.
So you're telling me you actually would be unable to discern the changes that took place during this interval of time because of the effects of the process itself?
Well, what happened from then, from July 2002, is I started to meet a whole lot of military intelligence people, and that allowed me to write another 6 books, and another 2 coming out shortly, so another 8 books. It allowed me to write 4 books in 1 year. How to Take Over the World, Stalin's British Training, Gifting the United Nations to Stalin, and New Zealand A Blackmailer's Guide, which is about 1,500 pages.
Do you think this was affected by this reorganization of your subconscious?
Yeah, put it this way, they don't talk to anyone, and they just don't talk to, people moping around. They talk to people who have some direction.
They being the
they being the living libraries and talking dictionaries. They being the ones who know. Right, and the ones who know don't talk to anyone, and they'll travel a long distance to talk to the right one.
For example, even if they're in New Zealand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just ask this, which will carry over after the break, which is coming up on us. Do you think Obama has had his subconscious reorganized?
I think that every American president for quite a while has had their subconscious organized, reorganized, reconstructed, or actually deconstructed. I think they've had their subconscious deconstructed to think according to the state. And the primary requirement of an American president is that they're a good public speaker and they do bugger all else. It's often that they say one thing and do another, and people believe what they say because they're the President of the United States. But the actual title of the President of the United States is Pirate Captain of a British Plantation.
On that wonderful thought, Greg, we're going to take our second break. We'll be right back. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very fascinating guest today, Greg Hallett. You can visit his website at greghallett.com. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very special guest today, a fascinating fellow indeed, Greg Hallett. You can visit his website at Greg, Hallett, HALLETT.com, and you'll find he's got 5 books there with the covers: Gifting the United Nations to Stalin, Stalin's British Training, How to Take Over the World, Hitler Was a British Agent in New Zealand, A Blackmailer's Guide, aspects of which we were discussing in the beginning of our conversation. Let me ask you this, Greg. If we were looking at your books, how would you characterize them yourself? Would you characterize these as histories, as historical fiction, as fiction? I mean, how strong are the claims you make, and what was your method?
My books are definitely not fiction. And around the time that my books started to get published, they removed the criteria to state on the back of the book whether it was fiction or non-fiction.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that was done in New Zealand?
Well, it happened in New Zealand. I don't know if it happened overseas as well, but it's definitely in New Zealand. All my books are fact. My books are best described as historical crime-solving non-fiction. So I go in great detail into certain aspects of history to establish, for instance, that Joseph Stalin was Cobra, who was living in London in 1910, 1911, and ran the Sydney Street siege and was allowed to escape. And the way he escaped was by having his people come in from the terrace house too long and bash holes through the doors and then cover them up with wardrobes and get Stalin out. And in the meantime, they brought in other bodies and threw those into the building and then burnt the building down as they were burnt bodies. And Stalin was allowed to escape. And the whole Sydney Street siege in 2nd of January 1911 was actually a military exercise run between Churchill and Stalin. They were working together. And they did work together. Churchill and Stalin did work together until 1945. They only fell out from 1945 to 53. And then it was Winston Churchill who had Stalin killed.
Where was Stalin at the time Churchill had him killed?
In Moscow.
He was in Moscow under some house arrest or something like that? He was under arrest?
He was poisoned. He was poisoned by Stalin, by Churchill, under Churchill's orders.
The reason being that he'd outlived his usefulness?
He was about to invade Yugoslavia and he wanted to create World War III. And it's interesting that another attempt for World War III was created in Yugoslavia recently with the wars in Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia seems to be a point where they try to create wars.
Let me just say that I have great affinity for the idea of historical crime solving because I've devoted much of my life to research on the death of JFK, the plane crash that took the life of Senator Paul Wellstone, and more recently the atrocities known as 9/11, on all of which have I published books. So I'm very sympathetic to what you're doing in general.
Yeah, because the history used to be written like these sweeping military moves and these sweeping ideological moves. But it actually comes down to the people who are in charge of the country are gangsters and they are doing individual crimes